Dear viewers, welcome to another extraordinary episode of our documentary channel about the heroes of faith. Today, we dive into a story that transcends the mere limits of religious history, entering the deepest recesses of the human soul, where courage meets compassion and faith transforms into tangible action. We are getting to know Elisha, a man whose life was a living testimony that when we completely surrender ourselves to divine calling, we are empowered to accomplish what the world considers impossible. This is not merely an account of miracles, but rather a journey of personal transformation, of a young man who left everything behind and became an instrument of hope for thousands of desperate people. Elisha lived in a turbulent period of Israeli history, a time marked by conflict, social injustice, and a population that cried out for genuine spiritual guidance. When the prophet Elijah, that legendary man who called down fire from heaven, identified Elisha plowing his fields with 12 yoke of oxen, it was not merely a casual encounter between two individuals, but a moment that would forever change the course of an entire nation's history. Imagine the terror, the confusion, and also the emotion that must have invaded Elisha's heart when that old prophet, revered and feared by all, threw his mantle upon his shoulders. That mantle was not merely a piece of cloth, but a monumental spiritual heritage, a responsibility that weighed like a burden upon the shoulders of a man who was still learning to hear God's voice with clarity. What makes this narrative particularly touching is how Elisha responded to that calling with a purity of heart that moves us even today. He could have refused, could have remained in his lands, continuing his tranquil and secure life, but something within him recognized divine truth in that encounter. From that moment forward, nothing would ever be the same, and we will see how his obedience would open doors to manifestations of divine power that would transform not merely individual lives, but an entire nation. As Elisha began his journey alongside Elijah, he was not merely inheriting a title or a position, but entering a school of true faith, where each day brought lessons that shaped his character and deepened his connection with the divine. The relationship between Elijah and Elisha was not that of a master and servant, but of a mentor who recognized in his apprentice extraordinary potential, an ability to go beyond what had been accomplished up to that moment. Elisha remained at Elijah's side during crucial years, witnessing miracles that defied human understanding, including that emotional moment when Elijah himself was caught up into heaven in a chariot of fire. That episode must have been both devastating and profoundly inspirational for Elisha, because it meant that now he was alone in his mission, without the protective mantle of the prophet who had guided him. Yet when we see Elisha picking up the mantle that had fallen from Elijah and asking where now was the God who had acted so powerfully through the previous prophet, we perceive a fundamental shift in his spiritual understanding. The mantle now belonged to him, not merely symbolically, but also in terms of responsibility and power. Elisha's trajectory of learning teaches us a profound lesson about the importance of preparation, humility, and the willingness to serve before leading. Many of us desire to be used by God in extraordinary ways, but few are willing to go through periods of formation, moments of doubt, silences, where it seems no one is hearing our prayers. Elisha understood that true greatness does not come from self-promotion or the pursuit of personal recognition, but from deep commitment to a purpose greater than ourselves. During these years of learning, Elisha absorbed not only spiritual teachings, but also observed how a prophet of God conducted himself in the face of temptation, how he maintained his integrity amid political and social pressure, and how his faith remained unshakable even when the entire world seemed to be conspiring against him. This formation would be absolutely crucial for what lay ahead, because Elisha would need a solid spiritual foundation to withstand the challenges that awaited him. When Elisha finally began his ministry in full, he not only continued the work of Elijah, but significantly expanded the scope of his actions, touching lives in ways that ranged from the personal and intimate to the political and military. Elisha's miracles were not merely demonstrations of divine power, but compassionate interventions in human suffering, tangible manifestations of God's care for ordinary people. When a poor widow came to Elisha in despair because her sons were about to be taken as slaves because of a debt she could not pay, Elisha did not merely pray, but guided her on how the miracle would manifest. A simple jar of oil would multiply into abundance, sufficient not only to pay the debt, but to sustain her and her sons for the rest of their lives. When we imagine that widow returning to her home with jars of oil, we understand that this was not merely a material miracle, but a restoration of hope, a renewal of faith that the universe was not a hostile and pitiless place. There was also Naaman, the leprous general who traveled from afar seeking healing, and when he finally found Elisha, the prophet did not even come out of his house to receive him, but sent a simple message: "Dip yourself 7 times in the river Jordan, and your flesh will be restored." Naaman's initial pride almost prevented him from obeying, but when he finally submitted his ego and followed the instructions, the restoration was complete and miraculous. Elisha's miracles frequently contained these profound lessons about humility, faith, and obedience. He raised a dead boy, fed 100 men with only 20 barley loaves, handled Israeli politics by anointing new kings, and even after his death, when his bones were touched by the body of a dead man, that man revived. These were not miracles of spectacle, but of mercy, and each of them left scars of grace on the lives it touched. The life of a prophet of God in Israel was frequently a life of constant conflict, of swimming against the cultural and political current, of being misunderstood by leaders who should have been seeking genuine spiritual guidance. Elisha was not a popular prophet who merely spoke what people wanted to hear, but a man who sought to offer difficult messages when necessary, confronting kings with their injustices and appealing to the people to return to their fundamental spiritual principles. During a military siege of the city of Samaria, when Syrian soldiers completely surrounded the population, bringing famine and despair, the king of Israel blamed Elisha for not intervening. People were dying of starvation, consuming unimaginable things in their desperation, and the king felt helpless. But Elisha, with a disarming calm, prophesied that within 24 hours there would be abundance of food. How could this be possible when the enemy was surrounding them on all sides? It was humanly impossible, but the prophet knew a power that transcended human limitations. When Syrian soldiers were mysteriously driven away by supernatural sounds, leaving their food and supplies behind, the prophecy was fulfilled in extraordinary fashion. Yet Elisha did not always see the immediate fulfillment of his prophetic words, and there were times when his faith was tested in profound and painful ways. In dealing with corrupt kings who frequently rejected his messages, in witnessing the injustice perpetrated against the poor and helpless, in seeing generations of people reject divine guidance, Elisha must have experienced moments of profound sadness and questioning. Nevertheless, he never abandoned his mission, never ceased calling for justice, never stopped trying to point people back to the path of truth. This persistence in the face of rejection, this ability to continue loving and serving even when seemingly no one was listening, is perhaps the most remarkable and human aspect of his life. He was not a man without doubts, not someone who did not feel the weight of the loneliness that frequently accompanies those who seek to make a difference in a world that often resists change. What often goes unnoticed in historical accounts about Elisha is how he demonstrated genuine and profound compassion for the simplest and most helpless people in society. He was not merely a prophet who worked for kings and generals, but someone who genuinely cared about the widow who had no way to feed her children, the leper rejected by society, the boy whose premature death would leave his mother absolutely desperate. When a Shunammite woman offered Elisha hospitality by providing food and a place to rest during his travels, the prophet recognized her sacrifice and desired to do something extraordinary for her. Even though she and her husband were elderly and childless, Elisha prophesied that she would have a son in her arms within a year. That promise surely seemed ridiculous to her at the moment, but what it demonstrated was that Elisha understood the human heart, recognized that woman's secret desire, and was willing to intervene in the natural course of events on her behalf. Later, when that same son became ill and died, the Shunammite woman ran to find Elisha with a faith that amazes us even today, certain that the prophet who had given her the boy could also rescue him from death. Elisha's response was to place himself upon the boy, his mouth upon the boy's mouth, his eyes upon the boy's eyes, his body upon the boy's body, and gradually the child's body began to warm. Eventually, the boy sneezed 7 times and awakened. What this demonstrates is that Elisha's miracles were not distant or intangible, but deeply human, intimate, and always focused on the restoration of life and dignity. He was willing to place his own hands, his own body, into action to serve those who sought him. Nothing was too small or insignificant to merit his attention and intervention. This characteristic of his ministry continues to resonate with us because it reminds us that true spirituality is not about grandiose proclamations or spectacular demonstrations of power, but about being present, being compassionate, and being willing to sacrifice oneself for the well-being of those around us. The everyday miracles of Elisha, those that do not frequently appear in the headlines of historical accounts, were often the most transformative. When Elisha began his independent ministry, he did so with a profound conviction that he had received a double anointing of the spiritual power that had operated so mightily through Elijah. This was not a thought born of arrogance or presumption, but a declaration of faith at the moment when Elisha saw Elijah being caught up into heaven. He specifically asked for a double portion of the Spirit that had operated so powerfully in the previous prophet, and that prayer was answered in a way we can verify through historical records. Elisha's miracles not only equaled those of Elijah in quantity, but frequently surpassed them in reach and impact. While Elijah had called down fire from heaven to consume sacrifices, Elisha multiplied bread to feed multitudes. While Elijah had raised a child, Elisha not only did the same, but also raised men through his bones even after his death. This multiplication of power was not merely numerical, but represented an expansion of divine grace operating through a human instrument completely surrendered. The double anointing that Elisha received speaks to us about infinite possibilities when we place ourselves entirely at the disposal of divine purpose. There is no limit to what God can do through a life completely dedicated. The story of Elisha asking for this double portion and subsequently seeing it manifest in his life is an invitation for each of us to reflect on our own spiritual aspirations. Are we asking for the double portion? Are we declaring that we want more, that we want to be even more effective instruments of grace and transformation? Or are we settling for a lesser measure of faith and power? Elisha's life challenges us to think on a grand scale, to believe that God can do far more through our lives than we ever imagined possible, and to be willing to pay the price of complete and unwavering dedication. As we advance into the final years of Elisha's ministry, we begin to understand that his life was never merely about himself, but about the lasting legacy that would continue operating long after his earthly voice ceased to be heard. Elisha not only healed lepers and fed multitudes, but transformed political systems by anointing new kings who could bring justice to the peoples. He not only prophesied future events, but established a system of prophetic fellowship, creating communities of prophets that would continue his work and expand his ministry. When Elisha began to grow old and his death drew near, we perceive that he was conscious that the mission was greater than a single life. This is particularly evident when King Joash of Israel visited Elisha on his deathbed and began to weep, recognizing that soon he would lose the man who had been a spiritual shield for the entire nation. The dialogue between the dying king and the prophet was extraordinary, for Elisha instructed him to take a bow and arrow, to open the window to the east where the Syrian enemy was, and to shoot the arrow of victory. Still weak on his deathbed, Elisha placed his own hands over the king's hands, transferring his anointing and his conviction, assuring that the kingdom would continue, protected even after his departure. This illustrates a profound principle. True heroes of faith never completely die as long as others continue their work. Elisha's legacy did not end when his earthly life came to an end, for his teachings, his recorded miracles, and especially the example of unwavering faith that he left behind, continue to inspire people to this very day. People who never lived in his time, who were never eyewitnesses to his miracles, continue to be transformed by his story, continue to find hope in his narrative, and continue to be challenged to question the limits of what God can do in their own lives. When we study Elisha's life, we are not merely reading about historical events, but we are being invited to participate in a process of transformation that transcends time and space, that touches different generations and cultures, and that continues to be just as relevant and powerful today as it was centuries ago. Dear friends and viewers who have accompanied us on this extraordinary journey through the life of Elisha, the successor full of miracles, we wish that you have felt in your hearts the weight, the emotion, and the profound inspiration that this story carries. As we conclude this documentary, we do not want you to simply leave with information about an ancient prophet, but to leave transformed by the possibility that God can do extraordinary things through lives completely dedicated to His own purpose. Elisha's story is not distant or inaccessible, but is a mirror that invites us to look at our own lives and question profoundly, what is the mantle that God is offering to me? What is the spiritual responsibility that I am called to carry? How can I be an instrument of transformation, healing, and hope for those around me? Elisha began as a simple man of the fields, but became someone who moved nations through his unwavering faith. There is nothing in his starting point that made him more special or more prepared than many of us, but there was something in his heart, in his willingness to answer the calling, that made all the difference. That same willingness is available to each of us at this very moment. If this story has touched your soul deeply, if you felt a spiritual calling as you followed Elisha's journey, we encourage you to subscribe to our channel, activate the notification bell so you do not miss any of the next documentaries we will share about the heroes of faith who transformed the world and continue transforming our lives today. Come and grow with us in this extraordinary community of spiritual learners, in this family that seeks to understand and apply the lessons of the giants of faith who preceded us. We genuinely want to hear from you in the comments below. Share with us which moment most touched you during this documentary, which of Elisha's miracles resonated most deeply in your hearts, which lesson you wish to apply in your lives from this moment forward. Interact with our community, create a dialogue with us and with one another, because we believe that when we share our experiences and reflections, we all grow together in understanding and wisdom. Please do not leave this video here. Share it with people you love, with those in your lives who perhaps need to hear this message, that no situation is impossible when we trust in God. No calling is too great when we respond with complete faith. May Elisha's life inspire you to find your own mantle of divine calling. May his perseverance in the face of challenges encourage you never to give up on your own dreams and vocations. And may the miracles he experienced cause you to believe that God still operates in extraordinary ways in our present days. Thank you so very much for accompanying us to this conclusion, for allowing Elisha's story to touch your hearts, for being part of this journey of faith and spiritual discovery. May God bless each and every one of you abundantly. May he multiply the faith in your lives, just as he multiplied the oil for the needy widow. And may he continue guiding your steps toward the extraordinary purpose he has for each one. Until the next episode here on our channel, where we will continue to explore the transformative lives of the great heroes of faith that inspire us to live with greater purpose, greater faith, and greater love. May God keep you in his grace.